Good afternoon to everyone. We love innovation, and this is why we're here. But there is a big misunderstanding around innovation. And this is why a lot of green activists are criticizing innovation instead of supporting it. What is that misunderstood? It's the fact that very often we speak about innovation as something in the future, quite far away. And it gives the impression that there will be solutions in the future that we don't have today, and that will compensate the mistakes we are doing today. What is the mindset around that? We can continue all the mistakes of today, all the waste, all the inefficiency, all the pollution, because sometimes in the future we will solve it. And of course, this is an alibi for inaction, and the ecologists are right to criticize it. But it is not the only part of innovation. And what we need to really communicate is the fact that, of course, we need R&D for the future, but we have already today enough innovation to solve most of the problems we have in front of us. And this innovation did not exist 20 years ago, started to exist 10 years ago, but without being profitable, and it is today existing, unprofitable, and ecological. And I think we have to emphasize very much the fact that today, even without additional innovation, we can do a lot. Now, after having said that, of course, we need additional to do better. But let's start already now. The second thing I'd like to say about innovation is that the fact that in the process, innovation is very easy. In the psychological part of the people, it's very difficult. Basically, what is innovation? It is when you look at the status quo and you think, how can I do it differently? That's innovation. You look what you have in front of you and you say, how can I do it differently? So, for example, when we are short of Russian gas or oil, instead of saying, where can we find additional gas and oil elsewhere, we turn the problem around and say, okay, if we don't have enough production, we have to become more efficient. And we put on the market all the solutions in order to reduce our consumption if we cannot increase our production. Or we look at the energy system in the world, which is localized. It's very centralized. And the question is, if we want to do it differently, we have to go to decentralization, which brings the door wide open for all the new renewables. But it's not only a question of renewable, it's a question of decentralization. And this is the main obstacle for the people who love to keep the centralization. When we look at mobility, we speak of electric cars, but we can turn it around. If we want to innovate, we have to understand that the other way around to see an electric car is not a car with a battery, it's a battery on wheels. And if it's a battery on wheels, it becomes useful for the 95% of the time where the car does not move. Because then it is a free storage without additional batteries to store the solar and wind energy from the entire day in order to give it back to the grid during the peak of demand. So you see that it's easy to innovate. You just turn around the habits and the assumptions. But psychologically, it's very difficult because people hate to be challenged. People hate to go outside of their habits and their certainties, which means that each time you innovate, you create resistance. You have to understand that. The people will resist. And just in terms of electric mobility, have you seen in the newspaper there was a survey just after the decision of the European Commission to ban thermal engines by 2035. And the survey concluded that 72% of the French population is against the ban of the thermal engines. 72%. So it's clear that each time we want to change the status quo, we are creating fear, anxiety, and resistance, which means that we have to be much more excited, enthusiastic in our way to promote the changes. For example, it's important not to speak about change, it's important to speak about modernization, because people are afraid of change, but if you tell them you're going to help them to be more modern, then they will follow you much better. The other thing is that innovation usually today is pushed instead of being pulled. You push innovation with incubators, grants, speeches, awards, and things like that. And then you have the terrible situation that was pronounced just before about the valley of death. You have fantastic startups here who will not exist in a couple of years anymore, because pushing is not enough. What we need is to pull. And how do we pull innovation? We pull innovation by creating a need. If there is no need, there won't be any innovation coming on the market. And today, let's be quite honest, what is the need to change? Maybe compassion for the environment? Not a lot of people are going to change to be more compassionate for the environment. There is profit, yeah? Profit, job creation. This is why you have fantastic companies like Engie, who is Michelin, who is pushing and pulling innovation on the market, because they know it is a new business opportunity. But there is a huge obstacle, which is the legislation of today. The legislation of today allows to pollute, allows to put as much CO2 as you want in the atmosphere. You can create a pump to create CO2 and put it in the atmosphere. Nobody will come to you and ask you to stop, because there is no legal basis for that. So you have a lot of people who continue to pollute and destroy the environment, and when they are criticized by the NGOs, they answer, I'm sorry, I respect the law, what I do is legal. And this has to change. It means that the norms, the standards, the rules have to be modernized as much as the technology is modernized. We have identified at the Soil Impulse Foundation, one of the 1,400 solutions, it's a module you put for 600 euros on your thermal engine, you divide by 2 the toxical emissions, and you reduce by 25% the fuel consumption, so it pays for the investment. It's a fantastic system. Before we all have electric cars, that is a system that should be installed on all the thermal engines that are remaining. But if you have a system like that, you will nevertheless not be allowed to drive when there is a peak of pollution, because the system is not recognized by the regulation. So you see that by changing a little sentence in the regulation, you will have millions of people who will buy that system. The startup who is producing it will become a big company. The people buying gasoline will save gasoline. The air pollution will be decreased. And it's a win-win situation for everybody. But if the law is not modernized, nothing will change in that sector. And it is like this for everything. Absolutely everything has to be modernized. Which means that when the climate is changing, the law has to change also. So I'm passionate about this topic, but I know I have to stop after about 10 minutes. So I would like to end up by asking, how do we change the law? And if you have the green activist striking in the street, it's a way to make the politician more receptive. They think, wow, now I have to do something. But the most important thing, the most important leverage is when it is the CEOs of the big corporations who ask for modernization of the legal framework. Because until now, the governments, the parliamentarians did not dare to change a lot of things because they were afraid it would be detrimental for the economy. You remember George Bush saying, I will never accept that ecology will destroy Americans' economy. But now it has changed. Now we can have the CEOs of the big corporations going to all the governments and say, look, we need modern regulations, and for very good reasons. First, we need certainties to know where it's going, because we cannot invest in hydrogen if you will then make regulations in another direction. So we need certitudes. Second thing is that we need to avoid distortion of competitivity because between the one who are the pioneers and the one who are followers who don't want to move. So there are a lot of reasons where the industry is extremely important. It is not only in bringing the solutions, it is also in explaining to the governments how to pull these solutions to the market to really make a change. So we see how important it is not just to speak between green activists, but to speak with the industry, because I think this is the place, this is the leverage, this is the solution to go into the future. And I will not end up by saying thank you for your attention. I'm going to say, please do it.